Good afternoon. It's Friday at 5 p.m. here in Chicago, and welcome to our 13th episode. Yes, Friday and 13 of the Non-Existent Story. It can only go well. I'm Casey. I'm here with my estranged sister, Hannah, who will be
Yes.
telling us
Mm.
two stories, one of which exists, that is to say, has been published and is often, in many cases, widely known stories, and in other cases, less well known, and one of which does not exist, which is to say that she has made it up. She'll be reading excerpts and summaries of both. And I am partaking of a Tempranillo that I opened 3 days ago. And,
I myself am trying a
and
gluten-free beer. My first. I don't know that I like it. I don't think I do. It's called Omissions, I guess, because they emit gluten. Mm.
Probably. The gluten is where the taste come from. I
Mm.
am I am drinking from a glass that exhorts me to live life and love life. At least one of those things which I'll be doing in the next hour, as will you. As will we
Yes,
all.
certainly. All
All
right.
right, Hannah,
Well,
what have you brought me?
okay. I brought you two stories and two excerpts for those two stories. Lucky you.
Hmm.
And the categories which I'll be focusing on for this episode are of the stream of consciousness in literature
Ooh, I like
and
it.
dreamscapes.
Ooh, I like it even more. Will you be
So,
explaining the difference between the two? People confuse them.
I will be happy to after I've read them through. I will.
Okay. Let me get some paper out before you start because it's nice for me to have notes. And then
Okay.
that could be one of my questions that I ask you. Where's it? Just here. No, that might be of looking for things that are probably not of sentimental value. Um,
Just write them
but
on your
could
arm
be.
with a Sharpie.
Yeah, that I have been known to do that. Okay, I think that I am ready. All right.
Okay. Story 1. As a girl, she attended Dresden and experienced her first of many things. Looking back, it was a happy time, maybe her happiest, although who can be sure after so many years? In Dresden, before she turned 18, she had had her first tentative love affair. Not with a student, but with a local man. She did not remember him as integral to the happy years. To be honest, she did not remember him at all. She did not remember that, in fact, he had been a student, though he'd graduated some time before she attended. Of all her memories at Dresden, the only remnant of her first lover was the dream. It was a recurrent dream, and it followed her through the First Great War and then the Second. It came to her on unexpected nights, after her wedding night and her children's first Christmas Eves. It came to her in her last nights of old age, after all her memories of the happy Dresden years had faded. It, the dream, remained. Which is really too bad, because it was a terrible dream, and what's more, stemmed from a conversation in 1915, which had not lasted 5 minutes and was totally unremarkable. But all the same, she dreamt it at 80 as she had at 20, just as the excerpt which follows shall show, which will be accompanied by T.R.G. Banks' Lakes in the Woods from the album Dreamland. No copyright. Following Casey's lead, I'm utilizing the Free Music Archive for my musical
Excellent.
accompaniments. Yes. And let me know when you are ready. All of these are going to be a little bit shorter than usual, so a
That's
little
fine.
shorter.
I'm so ready.
Okay, cool. Am I ready? Theodore watched her strangely. She thought Theodore watched her so strangely. His eyes held secrets, an icy fear, which is the fear of certain unknowing, oscillated and then swamped her, tumbling and tossing between silence and loudness. She sought him out, her raft, swam across the tavern floor, away from Theodore. There is something I must know, her eyes said. I have been found out, his replied, and he propelled her upward. She floated as he lay on the narrow bed, and his young eyes said, I trust that nothing bad will come of this. And then they said nothing, for his head was bowed. Then I cannot look away, he dismantled. His hair slid back, and beneath a withered orb, spider silk white tufts and browned age spots. Black brows drifted past, for they were only charcoaled on his handsome face, which was becoming something else. His strong legs, both but artificial appendages, attached with metal joints which he unhinged and dragged aside. An arm followed, then the lower jawbone, and ears, and part of the nose, so at last on the bed a shapeless ancient thing, and its young eyes trusting and hopeful. So hopeful, innocent young eyes in a face that was not a face at all. Theodore backstroked past them and laughed, relieved, for now there were no secrets. I see you have told her at last, you old dog. And to her, be not hasty in your actions, my dear, for what is age but a number? And the song just keeps going. Here we go.
And so the dream continues. I'll reserve questions, but just to be the body which was being sort of dismantled was Theodore's body or someone else's body?
Theodore was a friend. The someone else was the lover.
So this was the lover's body, presumably. I mean, it's a dream, so it could identity shifts, but the story is laboring under the assumption that the dismantled body is the lover's body.
Yes.
Okay. And then Theodore is the friend. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Summary 2, if you're ready.
I'm extremely ready.
Okay. Summary 2. They had not been to the house since the Great War. But before the war, there was the last time. The last good time. The last summer that the family, I mean the entire family, stayed at the house on the Isle of Skye, their mother arranged everything. Then there were 8 children, and the parents even still loved one another. Which is not to say that the marriage was happy, but as far as these things go, one might call it successful. It was a success bought by the father's professorship and maintained by the mother's exhaustive support to his ego. This, she felt strongly, was the proper order of things. The mother conducted all of her socializing and dinner parties and matchmaking with uncompromising adherence to the proper order of things. Despite this, she was really a most beautiful and kind-hearted lady. It is a small mercy she would die so unexpectedly at summer's end, before she could see the divorce her matchmaking had wrought, before she could see the Great War, and which of her children's lives it would claim. Yes, before all of that, there was the last summer, and the evening at the end of the last summer, when she sat in the parlor while her husband read. It was at such moments of uninterrupted thought she was most happy. She drifted into soft dreamscapes of thought and non-thought. And it was within this moment of her dreaming, on the cusp of wakefulness and eternal dreams, that I take my excerpt, accompanied by Montplaisir's Zerukurub from Free Music Archive. I'm sure I pronounced that name incorrectly, by the way.
Sounded great. You know, if there's like I have to send it to you sometime or feature it somehow on this. But there's a recording of there's a particular passage that you must read as an audition if you want to be an announcer for a classical music station, because they have to pronounce Italian, French, German, Spanish, Hungarian names perfectly. And so they'll put them all together in this various kind of composite forms, and then you have to pronounce them all perfectly.
Oh, wow.
With regional appropriate country accents for each. Side note. So that sounded good.
Wow. No, that's pretty cool, but you were freezing up there a couple of times, so I caught some of what you said. Hopefully the video was normal.
I think the video is usually fine. You went out for a second, but
okay.
The show must go on.
Yes, and continuing with the dramatic reading of excerpt 2. Waiting for the music.
And wait, it's extremely dramatic.
You hear it?
Yes.
And dismissing all this, as one passes in diving, now a weed, now a straw, now a bubble, she felt again, sinking deeper, as she had felt in the hall when the others were talking. There is something I want, something I have come to get, and she fell deeper and deeper without knowing quite what it was, with her eyes closed. And she waited a little, knitting, wondering, and slowly those words they had said at dinner, "The China rose is all abloom and buzzing with the honeybee," began washing from side to side of her mind rhythmically. And as they washed, words, like little shaded lights, one red, one blue, one yellow, lit up in the dark of her mind, and seemed leaving their perches up there to fly across and across, or to cry out and be echoed. So she turned and felt on the table beside her for a book. And all the lives we ever lived, and all the lives to be, are full of trees and changing leaves, she murmured, sticking her needles into the stocking. And she opened the book and began reading here and there at random, and as she did so, she felt that she was climbing backwards, upwards, shoving her way up under petals that curved over her, so that she only knew this was white or this is red. She did not know at first what the words meant at all. "Steer, hither steer, your winged pines, all beaten mariners," she read and turned the page, swinging herself, zigzagging this way and that, from one line to another, as from one branch to another, from one red and white flower to another, until a little sound roused her.
It was beautiful. I particularly in the last, I liked the multiple time periods that are kind of interwoven in the last one, because the music sounds more close. It sounds closer to a contemporary era, whereas the setting is more remote. So I think that works really well for kind of this montage thing, because these are the kinds of liberties that you can take when you're making movies or writing stories or things like that. Or working in multiple media. So all right, so
yes,
let's do a recap. These are quite similar, and partly because of the female, not only the female narrative, but I think what I might consider, and this is something we can discuss, is a kind of feminine narrative style.
Mm-hmm. Oh shit! I'm sorry, I'm getting a call. This is so embarrassing. Oops, hold on one second.
So awkward.
I think this might be pest control. Hello. Hey, how are you? Monday at 11? That would be great. All right, thank you. He said hokey dokey. They're going to spray for ants in my house at 11 o'clock on Monday.
Well, that's very appropriate and related to what we were talking about, which was nature. And natural imagery. You've submerged yourself to the bottom of this dream pool and then come out again in like an ant world. It's all it's kind of like a Dali painting or something. But yeah, so I guess the question that I kind of want to bracket for later in our discussion is this what I instinctively identify, or just kind of, without overthinking it, as a feminine scenario or a feminine set of images, and I don't know how valid that is, but it's worth considering what if that is. So where to begin? So I immediately kind of thought of Virginia Woolf because of not only because of your hair, which you maintain the fin de siècle chignon, but also because of the setting, which is this interplay between a happier or innocent pre-war time, which is very characteristic of, I think, of pre the Great War, as it was called, so before World War I, which is seen as kind of a halcyon era of innocence and happiness and childhood and things like that, and then the rude awakening that comes afterwards. So that, and then the fluidity of both, with a focus on the dream description that still does not leave you totally confused. And that's what also makes me think of Virginia Woolf, is that there's this tremendous fluidity and this kind of, as you were saying, stream of conscious expression, but it's not totally disorienting the way that some really fragmentary texts can be. Probably because it's not as interested in like citing a bunch of famous people, like in the Joyce kind of manner, where there's like 5 different languages and various classical poets, and it's quite disorienting. I think a Virginia Woolf-esque style is more approachable. So to summarize, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. In the first story, you set up a contrast. It's a woman looking back, and she's remembering her time in Dresden, which was bombed pretty hard, I believe, in World War II. I could be mistaken about that. So I think Vonnegut talks about that. Isn't that what the Vonnegut novel is about?
I don't know. I haven't read the Vonnegut novel.
I think Slaughterhouse-Five is about the bombing in Dresden, but I think that's World War II. But anyway, so she's going back basically to a city that no longer exists, and to her first love, which is before the Great War and before the war that followed. And she remembers a particular dream, and the dream is a recurring dream that she's had. Now she's 80 at the time of writing, but she's been having off and on for her entire life, let's say her entire adult life. So for about 60 years. Mm-hmm. So it seems to be, we're cued to find some sort of significance in this dream from the beginning. And it has to do with a lover who may have died in the war. Is that a possibility, or is that a certainty, or is that not a possibility?
I think it's likely, certainly, between World Wars I and II. Yes, but she started having the dream before either of the wars.
Oh, okay. So the dream is both kind of a retrospective that kind of zeroes in for some reason on a particular moment, and maybe a kind of a prophecy, perhaps too, because in this dream, it arises in response to, as many dreams do, something that seems totally banal and unimportant, which is just kind of a conversation. Or a single moment that lasted about 5 minutes, I think it said. Mm-hmm. And there's not a lot of conversation in the dream. It's more focused on an image. She says, "There's something I must know." Some secret at play here. And he says, "I have been found out." Mm-hmm. Also, which are endlessly suggestive, tantalizing. Then there's this extraordinary image of the dismantlement of the body. It's kind of grotesque and more than sad. I guess it's more grotesque than sad, but there's a certain sadness to it. It reminded me a little bit of the horror episode from The Great God Pan, where the body of the woman just kind of falls apart and melts away. But
right. I thought you might think of that from that passage.
Yes. No, because they're very arresting images, and so there's this sense in which, but it's being disarticulated the way like a machine would be, right? And so there's an aging process, as if he had lived to be, an old man and aged. So maybe he was missing, it's hard not to try to interpret the dream. Mm-hmm. Maybe he went missing, and so he was aging, and she'd never know what he'd look like as he aged. And then there's this dismemberment, which suggests machines and war and technology, and is much more impersonal and cold. But there's the eyes that stay and look innocent. And she kind of in the dream that she has, she kind of beholds this. She sees it happening, or is there some sort of more complicated scenario?
No, it's so they start off and it's kind of, if you break it down, she hears an inference, or she thinks that there's something that she doesn't know based on what she sees in the eyes of one of his friends. And then it fills her with unease. And then she goes to her lover, and her eyes her eyes express that she suspects something is wrong, and his eyes express that now he knows, or she knows, that something is wrong. And then he takes her to his rooms, and so she's kind of standing in the door, and he's lying on the bed, and that's when the dismemberment kind of takes place. And then at the end of it, she's staring at this, and then his friend Theodore from downstairs kind of walks by and makes his comments.
Oh, okay, I see. So there's a historical meta drama at stake of like the end of one era and a new era and wars and nations and geopolitics. But then there's also this like very personal thing of like this is her first lover, so there's a certain sexual fear, sexual tension, or sexual horror, or not rape imagery exactly, but a certain association between sexuality and violence that is implied and very obliquely suggested, I think. But with him on the bed, like you're describing, and her being there, there's this sense of fear and horror, I think. Or am I making this up?
No, I think that would be accurate. It doesn't really delve into her perspective, which is sort of strange because it's her stream of consciousness and it's her dream. But in a way, except for the very beginning of the excerpt, you get less of an insight into what she is experiencing than the other two male characters.
Okay. So this is the first one, and we'll go into like more comparisons. With this very interesting like palimpsest, if you will, of an aging process and a violent death process seeming to take place on the same body, which I think is super fascinating. Second one, we also have a similar time frame, right? So but it's perhaps more explicit in its statement of like the Great War, and then before that everything was orderly, right? So not so much a sense of horror as a sense of order versus disorder and chaos and, you know, ideological crises or what have you that comes after the war. So, and this order is, even in the very kind of brief summary, it's stated as the mother's, you know, commitment to the order of things, the patriarchal order with the father in charge, and he is the intellectual, and she adopts this kind of knitting. It reminds me a lot of a particular story, but it's been a long time since I've read it. So that I will see how close I am on this one. You could be playing tricks with me as you want. And then there's this great moment where she kind of, the narrator, or I guess it's not a first person, right? It's like a third person limited. It's she, right? Or is it I?
It kind of goes back and forth between the two.
Okay. Okay.
It's always the same person, but it'll flop in how it in the presentment of itself.
Okay, I got you. So let's say the dreamer, it describes this great moment right before you get into the summary, which I really loved with the music. I thought that was such a cool thing to put together. I mean, both selections were really good, but this one in particular I liked. But she's in this cusp of a dream and a not dream, and we have daydream in English. But that doesn't necessarily mean like abandoning consciousness. That can just sort of like be you distracting yourself and thinking of things that you might like to do. But there's a word in Spanish, which is entre sueño, which is like between sleep or between dream. And that's actually like a state that's neither asleep nor awake. And I've always liked that concept quite a lot. It's associated with the siesta.
They have that too in the film Hook. You remember Hook with Robin Williams?
Yeah, I don't remember anything about.
Well, yeah. There's a scene towards the end where the fairy, played by Julia Roberts, Tinkerbell, is in love with Peter Pan, but she understands at that point that, you know, that this is not meant to be. And then she tells him in that place between awake and asleep and dreaming or sleeping is where she'll have him forever, and that is enough for her. And it's a really cool, you remember the scene where she's in her little house hanging in that glass case, and then she explodes. And
she gets really big. I forgot about that part. That's arguably Robin Williams' best movie.
That is
Hook is that is a legitimately excellent Peter Pan. Like, and Peter Pan is, I think, infinitely great, and I actually really enjoy the politically incorrect Disney version too. But
well, because it focuses on the post Peter Pan story, but it doesn't. It creates its own story in that way, and I like pre and post stories of famous tales. Those are always good, I think.
yeah, because it adds a certain layering, and there's this sense of never. It's elusive and seductive because you're always kind of, there's all kinds of desire and nostalgia and like a little personal mythos that's cultivated. I like that too. Yeah. I mean, a lot of movies use the device of like the old man remembering the thing that happened. I mean, it's in Titanic and in Amadeus, which is a great movie, and many other tales. And it does work really well. And I think with Peter Pan, it works especially well because the real drama with Peter Pan is the desire for childhood, the missing childhood. And that's a thing, like that sense of loss and desire and almost having it and not quite is like really present. So yes, so anyway,
it makes a good metaphor for that kind of dreaming, kind of awake state. The twilight.
Yes, totally.
Yeah.
There's even like the Peter Pan syndrome, to always be a child, which I don't think should be a syndrome. I think it should just be how people are. At least many people.
And it
has no pejorative associations for me. I like the Peter Pans. But anyway, so there's this cusp of dream and not dream, which we associate with Julia Roberts as Tinkerbell.
I do, anyway.
As one does. And then there's this sinking into the water, which is an enormously rich image of water is associated with the unconscious. Like I've read this before, and apparently with like lots of Freudian things and also other approaches to understanding how the psyche works, independent of like just neuroanalysis and things like that. That water and the depths and submerging oneself, it has a lot to do with the unconscious. So she sinks in, and then there's all these beautiful images that are kind of like the things that I always like to draw or try to draw, which usually has to do with some sort of fluid female. I'll show you, actually. I just made a collage.
Oh yes, I would
that you should use. 1 second. All right, so this is only for the viewers, but there's a collage. Let's see if you can see it. I think it looks kind of like the story that you chose.
Oh yeah, it's even got Victorian hairstyles, or maybe they're more like mermaid hairstyles. I love this. What inspired your collage? Is this part of the free time you've been having lately?
Yes, and also I have a big pile of like museum brochures and guides, and I'm a member of the Art Institute, so I get a magazine every month, which is great. And then I have like just different postcards and just little things that I collect, and sometimes like advertisements at restaurants and stuff. So I had a big pile of them, and I started going through them, and I was like, oh, I'll make this. So anyway, I like it. It's actually supposed to be about the Tempest, but I think that you could interpret it other ways. So yes.
Well, water, it does lend itself to so many different interpretations too. It's a very universal and ubiquitous kind of element.
Yes, the water, island, nature, woman elements are quite.
It is womanly. Yes.
It's well. This is what I'm saying. I think there's a certain kind of feminine fluidity to it. It's not like harsh and geometrical. Anyway, I can maybe. If I write a story inspired by your stories, then I will use that as my image on the website or something. But anyway, so she has this beautiful images, and I don't get the sense so much of a conflict or a particular moment. She's just she's sinking down into this water, and there's these there's the China rose all bloom, and there's fragments of poems and readings and all kinds of beautiful things. Actually, it almost seems like a fantasy world more than like a horror world, as we kind of saw in the first one. So is it tied to a particular moment, do you think? Or is it more of like an escapist fantasy romp?
Well, I think the whole idea is there's not a conflict going on as in the other story as much as a contrast. So you have the summary which describes, all of the horrors that are impending on this family in the microcosm of the larger world of affairs that's about to happen with World War I. But you have the last good summer on the precipice of all of this horror, and the last good moment that this mother has, and the last good summer that this family has, while it's still an entire cohesive family. And I think that the moment that it's kind of beauty in part is due to its, I don't want to say meaninglessness, but there's nothing that makes it unique. It's just a beautiful moment of thought and non-thought that she has while she's knitting in a parlor. But I think that is one of the reasons why it really is so beautiful. So it's a
totally visual moment. I mean, it's I think one of the moments where, like, in a story where, like, narrative totally would give way to poetry or something like that. And it's just a string of images. There's one in particular, the China Rose all abloom. Words like shaded lights, I really liked. And there are these associations between words and color, which I've only ever seen in a book of.
Right. That's what it made me think of too.
Yeah. Well, because we talked about this book that I gave you and then took back and now have 2 copies of.
Yes. Speak memory.
Yes. So the very syllables, and that each syllable is associated with a very, he's quite particular, and so it's not just L is green. It's something like the phoneme sh is associated with deep chartreuse or emerald or moss or something like that.
Yeah, but a very particular one. Yeah.
Yes, mint and apricot and these kind of like natural tones. So I'll guess. And on the, I'll try to be more efficient and guess.
Yeah, so we can start talking about them, which I'm very excited to
talk about them. We'll work on the formatting. But so because and you might be setting me up, but because you have a macabre and lurid imagination, you always gravitate towards the most horrific things.
Fortunately,
because that's how your twisted little mind works. And so because of that, and because of the mentioning of Germany, which somehow could be related to the previous episode, I'm going to guess, and also because I feel like, and I could be wrong about this, I feel like I've read something similar. What work I think the second one is from. But but I think that you wrote the first one. Is that right?
Yes, I did.
Yay! Finally. All right. Well, I'm still down 2. I mean, it's a 1 in 2 chance. I should get some right. And then is the second one To the Lighthouse?
Yes.
Ah, God, I'm good. I should get bonus points for that.
If you guess the author and the book correctly, or at least the author, one or the other.
Well, I mean, it's dangerous when you pick a giant in the literary landscape.
I know,
like
and
I
felt sure that you would guess correctly, but I couldn't resist because I didn't know any other example that I thought was as beautiful and positively brilliant in stream of consciousness and dream. So merging the two, which is what I particularly wanted, and I knew that Virginia Woolf had accomplished it magnificently, and so I had to use it. And so I actually didn't reference the entire book. The book is broken down into 3 parts. And my focus was on part 1 of Virginia Woolf's To the Lighthouse, which is called The Window. So, and also
is it Mrs. Ramsey who's she knits?
Who I always thought was one of the most kind of complex characters I'd ever read about.
I got Mom that book.
Yeah.
Because I was like, you are Mrs. Ramsey. I think she read it. I'll have to ask her. But yes, go on. So that's only because that's what threw me off a little bit is because, well, first of all, they're very hard to summarize, like plot-wise.
Yes, because there's no plot in To the Lighthouse. at all. It focuses. It's all about. It was one of the first great examples of stream of consciousness writing. So there's no plot. It's focusing initially on kind of a picture of the family during the summer, and there's not one main character. Mrs. Ramsey is famously the most complex character, but you get insights into the kind of stream of consciousness of many of their minds throughout part one, and then part two doesn't even really focus on a person. It focuses on time as like its own entity with its own quirks and stream of consciousness and then effects that it has on things. And then part three is when the family, now older, Mrs. Ramsey has died, and so have several of the children. Spoiler for anyone who hasn't read the book.
Okay, no, it's pretty crushing. So this was in the class that made me decide to be a comparative literature major. This was one of the first books in comparative modernisms. Mm-hmm. And I remember he was awesome. He was a great professor. He wrote a book about perfume or something. He was just a magnificent human being. Mm-hmm. And Stamelman, I think his name was. And he came in and he was like, I remember I'll never forgive her for killing Mrs. Ramsey.
I know. It was horrible. I remember I had an English class. It was all on Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. It was one of the best English classes I ever had. And the dean of the English department taught it. And he was so passionate and fabulous. And he would like pace the floor back and forth as he was reading or talking or lecturing. And he would break into different like Scottish accents at different points. And he was talking about Tolkien, and he made connections between like the thumping of the orcs as they're building all these horrible machines, to where Tolkien himself was in World War I, and he was also in the same area where they were building the Titanic, and the thumping of the machines as they melted the steel for the Titanic, which would later sink. And he's doing it all with this heavy, like roguish Scottish accent, and I was just absolutely in love. So,
oh man, I wish you'd recorded that, because that sounds amazing. And most of the like critical academic approaches to Tolkien are kind of focused on like the racism and things like that, which is definitely there and definitely not to be dismissed. But I think that does kind of steamroll over some of the more interesting qualities, and I don't think that's why it's survived and has captivated so many people. It's captivated people because it's rooted in like these real tangible experiences, right? Mm-hmm. And I guess he is kind of a contemporary of Virginia Woolf in a way, right?
Tolkien, I think so. He was certainly impacted by World War I significantly, although in a different way. So was Virginia Woolf. She was so impacted by it that she killed herself rather than live through the Second World War.
Is that why? I thought.
Well, I'm sure there were other reasons, but she was kind of obsessed with the terror of well, her husband was Jewish, and she mm-hmm. felt a lot of the impacts of that. And then she was, debatably a manic depressive, and she had all of these kind of fears, and she had a lot of issues, but she was
the reasons for a person to kill themselves are very complicated, and sometimes, yeah. Mm-hmm. Anyway, it's hard to just kind of like judge that exactly. I really, A Room of One's Own is so good. So I think that's the last thing I read. I have Orlando waiting for me.
I just bought Orlando. I've never read it. I need to read. It's now I'm going to though. They made a film out of it, but I won't watch it until I've read the book.
Yes, I'm with you on that. The film is, I think, part of the cover. I think Cate Blanchett plays.
Mm-hmm. And I love her because she's so wonderfully androgynous.
She's androgynous and also extremely dainty and porcelain, which seems appropriate mm-hmm. For a Virginia Woolf character. Both androgynous and which is one of the reasons why she is such a great writer, is that there's this extremely feminine intellectuality and string of images and fluidity and choice of characters and attention to sensations and introspection that and then all these epic things are just kind of a background, and in the end they're not what captivates you. So anyway.
The focus on I don't want to say the banal, but what we see is the norm or the boring tedium of life, and the real focus on it and the poetry of it. I really love that in any writing that I see, and it's in poetry a lot too, which I also enjoy.
Yeah, it's hard to do well. It's hard to do well, and it's easy to fall into another extreme in which very silly things are fetishized, and people think that just because they describe like them drinking tea or a teacup, that it's somehow very literary, and it's a more difficult balance to strike than one would think. And she's so cultured too that she laces it. So even this dream and this moment and the knitting, like the knitting is just kind of the background, and then the actual introspection is actually quite a saga. It's like a little mini watery odyssey through great works of poetry. I mean, it has a profound resonance, I think. Well, so the third one about a painter? I feel like someone comes and is painting something.
There's a character, I think her name is Bertha Beck. It's something that starts with a B. Anyway, she is present in the first and the last. So she starts a painting within the first part of the book. And she's kind of critical, more so I think than any other character of Mrs. Ramsay, but also in her thrall, as is everyone. And I don't know. She does some paintings which she finishes and thinks are terrible and she won't let anyone look at. But she starts a painting which she won't later finish until part 3, some like 10 or 20 years after part 1, when she sees Mrs. Ramsay's adult children with their father kind of sailing on the water to the lighthouse, which they never even went to in the first part of the book or the second part of the book. So I really don't know why she called it To the Lighthouse, but it was a resounding image.
I mean, you're never quite there. It's not at the lighthouse.
It's to the lighthouse. That's true.
It's like towards, like kind of in between. I don't know. There's a certain mobility, I think, implicit in that. No, they're very interesting and difficult works to summarize. I had this problem with Autumn of a Patriarch, which is just a cyclical retelling of various incidents in a place that doesn't seem to have either a beginning or an end, and there's no real narrative. So the act of the summary becomes quite creative, and I wouldn't have recognized the work on the summary.
Well, I'm glad. That was the one reason I was hoping maybe she won't get it, but probably she will, because again, I just tried to focus on part 1. Well, and its historical context more than focusing on too many details of the story.
Yeah. No, but I don't remember the dream sequence for some reason. I think there is, however, there's an essay by Auerbach about Virginia Woolf and a knitting sequence. So it might actually be about that particular scene. I haven't read it. I have it, or I used to have it somewhere around here. It might be at home, actually. But Auerbach has this great novel, or it's not a novel. It's based on realism in literature, and where this comes from and where it's going, and how it combines the high art of tragedy with the low art of comedy. I think that's the argument. But it starts with the Odyssey, and it goes on, and the Quixote is in there, and various things which I don't remember. And I think the last, or the second to last, is Virginia Woolf and a knitting scene, because it's a new form of realism. Although she doesn't really have very many comic moments, so I don't know how he tied that into that one.
Well, apparently, I don't know about To the Lighthouse. Orlando is supposed to be almost completely comic.
Oh, good, because I've heard that she's quite funny when she wants to be funny.
Yeah,
as smart people are.
Well, as smart and often depressed people are. I'm finding. Something about depression gives people like a unique sense of humor, which is really quite good.
I think we just find very dry, dark humor funnier.
So no, Mark Twain is a perfect example of this.
Yeah, well, he got really dark because half his family died, and he was not pleased. So he gets progressively darker and also progressively funnier. And there's a point where it becomes so dark that it's not even funny anymore, but that's like very late. And I'm far from having read everything by Mark Twain, but he has a very late novel that's I mean, kind of a nightmarish situation. Speaking of horrific things, so I've go to the first one that you wrote, which is great. Like the dismemberment in that image is also really cool. I think you should paint some illustrations for these or something.
Oh, I don't think I would dare, because it's too based in personal experience, which is why had to find a dream sequence with stream of consciousness.
Wow. Is this a recurring dream that you have?
Well, I've only had it a couple times, but yeah, it's pretty terrifying, actually.
That is pretty terrifying.
I didn't capture it entirely as it's happened for me. I added. I mean, the backstory is completely falsified, as is some of the buildup, and then I incorporated a lot of the watery images and locations and time period. That's all something I just created for the 13th episode of the podcast. But the horrific basis of the story, yes, and yeah.
It's so funny because when you try, it's very hard to transfer a dream into writing. I recently had a very scary dream in which I and a companion, and I don't know who it was, entered a house full of red balloons. Every room was full from ceiling to floor with red balloons. And then we went through and we went into the backyard, which could have been various backyards and kind of was various backyards from my childhood and your childhood to a certain extent.
Was Philadelphia there?
No, that's not. It's more of a back lot. It's a different kind of backyard. Oh, I had good times in that little lot. But so I went, and there's this crazy old woman who's kind of like a Miss Havisham character, which I always find fascinating. The Miss Havisham image, and she had sent 3 little daughters who were little girls, but were also like 90 or 100 years old, and they were all dressed in gray and like Victorian kind of mourning clothing, mourning weeds, and they had no faces, and they'd been sent to the corner because many years ago a man in a white hat had come and seduced them, and they'd been very willing, and so now this crazy old woman was like punishing these girls by making them wait in the corner of the yard like for indefinitely. And she was totally insane, and she was all pale and gray, but she had these like really big eyes with lots of eyeliner. Anyway, I tried to write it in my diary, and I showed it to a friend, and he was like, "That's hilarious." I was like, "This is not
when you're dreaming it. It's not." I had a recurring dream that is partially cartoon, and it's one of the most horrible nightmares I've ever experienced. You know that kind where you wake up and you feel frozen and sweating, like you don't want to move. But when I describe it, it doesn't sound scary at all. It's like a Bugs Bunny witch chasing me around the house. You know that our house will go in a circle, and she has pizza on the counter in the kitchen and put poison on it. And I know this, but I still want to like grab a slice and eat it as I'm running from her, and she's still chasing me. And it sounds hilarious, but it was not funny when I was dreaming.
No, because I think they really do, like, dream sequences obey visual imagery, and there'll be lines that someone will tell you, but that's not what I remember. What you remember is the image. And then when you translate that into different words from the dream, then it often falls into some sort of like absurd cliche or something like that. Like, especially the red balloons, I don't know why. That Bugs Bunny will automatically make it not horrific.
But it was so bad.
I think that I like the choice of the dream, and that you pick something from your own experience, because it's the kind of dream that could be had by anyone in any time and lends itself to all kinds of interpretations.
Right. Like rooms filled with red balloons. I mean, that could mean any number of things.
Yes, I think specifically the hit song 99 Red Balloons.
Were there 99 in total?
I don't know.
Was it 99? Was it 99 Luftballon? Was this the English version or the German version?
I'm pretty sure I don't dream in German. That would be scary. But also, it was also brilliant because I don't know any German. I could count to 10, and then I would have to start over. Do that 9.9 times. But so the Virginia Woolf, is there anything else you would like to add about the experience of writing dream sequences?
I would say that it wasn't so much the dream sequence, which I found kind of challenging, but also very, very fun, as much as the stream of consciousness aspect of it. So Virginia Woolf, as you know, was one of the first pioneers in that literary form of writing in stream of consciousness, although there had been other examples before the term was invented by a psychologist in the 1890s, William James.
William James also invented that term?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know. He's the brother of Henry James, right?
Ah.
It's a family of geniuses, like a Salinger-esque family of geniuses. And William, I think, was the eldest and founded like he founded a whole department, I think, of psychology at Harvard.
He did. He's a huge deal. He's a huge deal in psychology, even though, I mean, the stream of consciousness has been kind of debunked in the field today. But it was a pretty big deal when it came out, although Freud kind of disagreed with the concept of stream of consciousness. He just believed in the unconscious and how your dreams, because there is a lot kind of going on. There's a lot of interplay between stream of consciousness and dreams. So Sigmund Freud believed that the unconscious, and it was all about how dreams could be interpreted. Whereas William James was more about just it's called the inner monologue of the mind, and how people think is not how people write and how they speak necessarily. This is a very different thing. So those two are kind of at odds with each other in that respect. But
interesting.
Yeah. But William James coined the term stream of consciousness, which later became a literary term like 20 years later. It became
the surrealists were really into it. And there's a whole, a lot of the post-war art, especially post-war literature, is really interested in finding some access to this this unfiltered, unrepressed, if you will, realm of the mind as a more authentic place of creation and life and thought and so on. I mean, we could have like a whole separate podcast just about,
but it's interesting because
about the history of this.
Yeah, it's difficult because I found writing with stream of unconsciousness is more challenging than writing without it. I feel I have to. It comes across when you read it as unfiltered because it will often neglect most punctuations and the idea is you're jumping from point to point to point. It's more of like seamless. There's no this idea, and then it's not compartmentalized. It's completely flowing and crisscrossing together in a way that makes sense, but is not organized. So it's actually very challenging, at least it was for me, this practice, this exercise of writing with stream of unconsciousness.
I think it's one of those things where I don't necessarily believe in this, like, oh, I need to be inspired and only then can I write. Like a lot of times you just have to make yourself sit there and you don't feel like it and you have to do it anyway. Yeah. So, but with that particular kind of writing, I think that there's a novel by a very funny woman from, I think, Serbia, one of these Eastern European countries, possibly Croatia. Dubravka Ugrasic is her name, I believe. And she has a novel called Fording the Stream of Consciousness, which is a brilliant title. But I think it kind of makes fun of writers and literary conferences and things like that. So it's quite meta in a certain way, but it's very, very playful and definitely has this refreshing perspective of a woman who's kind of on the fringes of like the literary establishment, making fun of some of its tropes. It's not itself in any way. I haven't read all of it, but I bought it. I have it somewhere around here. It's not but I think one of the stream of consciousness thing got really abused.
Yeah,
at a certain point. And I like really fluid narration, but like even with the Virginia Woolf ones are the ones that you show. I mean, there's this preoccupation with the dream, which is related to stream of consciousness, but these are, I mean, they're worked on texts that are edited and thought about and modified. Like it's not a glimpse into the real interiority of someone like that. That's
definitely. Although there are some more modern than modernist examples of stream of consciousness.
little tiny clap.
more, I shall say, contemporary. Salman Rushdie uses it often in his work. If you've read Midnight's Children, for example, there's some of it. He tends that way, though, I think, in a lot of his writings. Then I found out, I didn't know, Arthur Machen, who was featured in a previous episode with the great god Pan.
Our most popular episode, by the way.
Yes.
On social.
Yes, he also utilized it in another fantasy horror novel called The White People, which is also one of the early precursors, inventions of an inference or reference to a book, some mysterious book on the occult. He called it the Green Book. And ever since then, with Lovecraft and King and so on, there's always like the Necromonicon. There's always this reference to this higher occult evil book that has all of this reputation and
grimoires of some kind,
right? Which is actually completely made up. But he was one of the original horror writers to come up with this concept, which I thought was pretty cool. And he did it in The White People.
It's a great device.
Yes.
Well, I mean, like, because it immediately gives you a sense of like your world becomes more complex and everything seems to be more meaningful, and it creates suspense, and I mean, it's like an alternative Bible thing. Interesting. The White People and the Green Book. The White People does sound like a horror story.
And apparently it's about this diary that these two men come across, written by this young girl. You already see inferences to the great god Pan. This young girl who had a nanny who was like a witch. And so this girl becomes obsessed with the occult and is writing about it in her diaries. And then as it becomes more climactic, the diary stops. And the men have it, and they're reading it, and they research and discover that this girl like died of poisoning herself or something at a very young age. It's very bizarre. It
makes more sense than the diary like writings where they're like, he's approaching, he's lifted the knife above my head. Like, stop writing. Furiously scribbles. Go away.
Oh no!